Great. Thanks, Scott. And thanks everybody for showing up today. This is a big group today. So this is exciting. Make sure to submit your Q&As. It can be on the topic that we talked about or anything in general. So we've been looking at what puts meaning and what puts purpose in relationships the last few weeks. So today we're going to talk about goals in relationships. And before your eyes glaze over, because that's how I used to feel about anytime goals were talked about, we aren't going to talk about how to set them and how to follow through. We're going to talk about the role they play in positive connection in relationships. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a story from my own life. So Scott and I were talking before the recording started. We're both taking a week off next week, and I did a little pre-vacation this last weekend, took 4 days, and I went camping with my family. And the kind of camping that I like to do is not the KOA, set up your tent on gravel, around a bunch of different trailers, and still have electricity and running water. I like to get completely off the grid. I grew up backpacking. I grew up primitive camping. And this was something that, for whatever reason, I had determined when I decided that I was going to date, I was going to court, and wanted to pursue kind of more serious long-term relationships in my life. I had determined that this kind of backcountry hobby and this backcountry life was going to be something that I would need to give up in order to have any kind of a normal, healthy adult relationship, which says a lot about where I was at in my life at the time. So it was news to my now wife when we were dating, several months into dating, and I told her I used to be a guide in the backcountry in Yellowstone and Teton National Park. And she said, "Do you still do that stuff?" And I said, "No, I've got to focus on school. I've got to focus on a career." Like that was for a younger time in my life. And we kind of left it. Over the past couple of years, especially as our kids have gotten older, and we've talked about the values that we want to teach them, we've talked about the experiences we want to have as a family, this has come back on the table in a really big way. The place where we went camping is a place where I grew up camping. It's high up in the mountains, no running water, no toilets, just real primitive, beautiful alpine meadow, high altitude camping. And this is something that is now a really big part of our lives, and we do this frequently. It's actually I guess you could call it a goal of mine, but it's a shared goal we have, and we work together to make it happen. And the way that we came to having this be a shared goal is we had to start having some conversations that we were uncomfortable with in the beginning. Now, I know compared to other conversations you can have, whether or not we want to do hardcore camping is not as big of a deal as other things in a relationship. But the principle is that in order to find out whether or not your relationship can support your goals and your desires, you have to talk about it. You have to put yourself outside your comfort zone. You have to challenge some assumptions you may have made, and you actually have to talk to your partner about what they want out of life and what you want out of life. Unlike emotions, we can actually legitimately disagree with somebody's goals. We can have an opinion about somebody's goals, and they can have an opinion and they can disagree with ours. And it's legitimate to either feel like you can get completely on board with your partner's goals because you believe in them, or to feel like you can't get on board and maybe you even need to oppose their goals. There's a legitimate difference in there. I really want to reiterate here that a difference in goals in your relationship with your partner, it can feel wrong to you, and that's okay. That's why we need to have one of these conversations, because this is one of those fundamental parts of a relationship that if it's not in line, the best you can do is kind of exist together. And sometimes we're okay with that, having a relationship that's an arrangement. Maybe we maintain a house together, maybe we maintain a bank account together, and we raise children. And the personal fulfillment and the goal fulfillment isn't something that this relationship is about. But if you need your relationship or want your relationship to be about mutual fulfillment and pursuing goals and dreams, this is a really important issue to talk about together. So the first question I would ask is, have you talked about your goals and your vision for the future with your partner? Why or why not? Whether you have or haven't, there's probably legitimate reasons for each, and those reasons for each, I think, are a really good barometer of where your relationship stands. And it may be we haven't talked about it because we're neck deep in addiction recovery, and the last thing that's on our mind is whether or not we want a vacation in Europe at some point, or whatever that goal may be. However, I do think that goals early on in recovery and goals for a relationship long term, they do have a place. What's up, Scott?
Your audio's kind of got a little crazy there. Can you turn your audio off and then back on and just check it?
Yep.
Okay, give it a shot.
How's that?
Yeah, it seems okay. I can hear it, but somebody said they were having trouble hearing, and then it went for a second. So it could just be the internet.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully that doesn't persist.
Okay.
But for, like I was saying, for couples in recovery, I think talking about goals at any stage in recovery is really important. I'll often say to couples that it is possible that as you individually work a recovery and you work a recovery together, you may discover on the other side that you are different people than you thought you were. And you may decide that this relationship isn't the relationship that's going to propel you forward. That's one of the risks, if you will, of any kind of recovery or any kind of healing. It's also an opportunity to really talk and to get to know the person that, at least for now, you're attached to, you're committed to, the relationships that you're in. And rather than avoid maybe some of those scary realizations, to really welcome them in and utilize the resiliencies and the skills that you're learning in recovery to help you cope with some of those changes that can happen in your relationships. Most of the time, I think we can be so thrilled that we landed a relationship, or that we just have somebody, that we don't want to rock the boat. And talking about what we really want out of life in a meaningful, connected way, I think is kind of scary, or doesn't even cross our mind. There is such a thing as compatibility in relationships. And like we've talked about in the past, it doesn't have to be a real huge amount of compatibility. In happy couples, 69% of the issues they have between each other are not resolvable, meaning they don't agree on 69% of the issues when they're happy. So we don't have to have 100% compatibility, but we do have to have some. We have to have enough to get started on. And this is one of those areas that I think for most people tends to be a pretty important area. If I really want this, I really believe in this, I want my relationships to support that. So when we're talking about our goals and our relationship goals, as always, if you've tuned into a lot of these, you'll notice a theme here. Learning the history, the background, the values, and the dreams in your partner's goals and your own goals is one of the most valuable things that you can not just know, but you can communicate about. Because that's really the why I hold the goals that I hold. And understanding my partner's history, their dreams, and their values helps me understand why they hold the goals that they hold. So as important as camping is to me, and sleeping in the dirt for nights on end, my wife feels the same way about Disneyland, something that I've never really understood. And we spent a lot of time early on in our kids' lives debating on whether or not this is a place that we want to put our money in and we want to go. And it wasn't until I started asking her the why, and it seemed like such an obvious question, but I really didn't understand it. It really wasn't about like, oh, Disneyland's such a happy, wonderful place. It was memories that she had built with her family. It was associations that she had with this place that I didn't have with the place. But through her and understanding what it meant to her, I could get on board with that goal. And we could make that happen, and we could have a family experience that maybe wasn't my ideal, but it was one that I could support wholeheartedly. because we had sought understanding. Some of the common issues that I think come up that couples have a really hard time talking about, number one is money. That's probably the biggest place where a disparity in goals can lead to a lot of conflict. Money symbolizes a lot in our relationships and in our culture. So that's an area that I think is pretty important to understand what your goals are and your partner's goals are. We may have different goals around how we want to vacation and how we want to recreate. We may have different goals on how we want to raise our children, what our hopes or dreams are for recovery. This is something I love in Dr. Rob's approach to like a sobriety plan. I call it the yes list, the positive things in recovery that you're going to focus on. He talks about stating your hopes and your dreams, what you hope recovery will bring to you. At any stage in recovery, if you have any kind of conversation going with your partner, I think that can be a really revealing question. What do you want to get out of this process? Where are you hoping this is going to land you? And then really communicating and seeking understanding on why that's important. That can help couples set a trajectory, set a course for recovery, even if we're not in a place where we're doing like heavy couples work, but just understanding the person that your partner wants to become, the changes they want to see happen. That can help. That can help to feel a little more connected to the relationship, or at least more understanding the relationship. If you want intimacy in your relationship and you want partnership, you have to know where you stand in this. You have to have those hard conversations. For me personally, that was a big learning curve, was to risk rocking the boat and to say to my spouse, hey, this is really important to me. This is something that I want to do, or this is something that I want to see happen. And I just so happened to marry someone who really challenges that baseline belief I have that people don't want to adjust for me or don't want to support me. And it's been really good for me to face some of that fear and to lean into a partner. I've also experienced this professionally as well, facing some fears and leaning into a partnership or leaning into colleagues really allows the relationship to either go to the next level or to see very, very clearly that there needs to be a change in how the relationship is structured. If your goals aren't mutually exclusive, as you've talked about them, if they're not mutually exclusive, you'll have to learn how to compromise. And compromise is not the art of getting something way crappier than you wanted and trying to be happy about it. It's the art of keeping intact the basic values and the basic level of importance on an issue for you while still maintaining flexibility. A while ago, it was probably about a year ago, when Tammy was co-hosting with these with me, we talked about compromise. And we talked about like a 2-circle method for compromise. I'll draw it out here. Let me get something dark enough that we can actually see in the notebook. So what compromise is, it's knowing here in the center circle, these are the things that you are inflexible on, the things that you need to have intact. These would be your basic values, your basic wants. Notice how small that circle is compared to the larger one, which is the areas of flexibility. When you know what your goals and your dreams are and your partners are, again, if they're not mutually exclusive, you can hold fast to some of what's core and important for you and find lots of areas to be flexible and accommodating. So once you're able to determine that you want to work together on goals, you're going to get good at compromising. When you understand where your partner is coming from, and you understand that thoroughly, then you can start offering support and your partner can start asking for support on how to reach their goals. For a lot of relationships, after we get over the initial drama and the initial chaos of the relationship, do you like me, do you not? Are we going to weather this storm or not? This is really what life becomes, is this continual self-improvement, this continual relational improvement. And that doesn't just happen because we want it to happen. It happens when we get really specific about what we want and we work on those specific things. So that is the role of goals. in relationships, and we can open it up to questions now.
Yeah, John, just real quick, it kind of strikes me that this would be, as a single person, it kind of strikes me that this would be common sense if I was getting into a relationship, to find out someone's real goals. But I also have been in relationships, and I've seen other people in relationships, and nobody does this. I mean, at the beginning, why not? Do we not understand our own goals? Do we just not realize how important it is to have some, at least knowledge of your goals and my goals and what, why do people not do this?
I go back to something. I think I most recently heard this from Brene Brown, that the two biggest drivers of human behavior are the need to belong and the need to be an individual. And I think most of the time when we haven't had a lot of experience, life hasn't beaten us up enough to teach us some wisdom. I think we default to belonging. And so, especially when it comes to personal goals, I would say that this doesn't lessen the work of a relationship. It actually increases it. And so initially in relationships, or maybe when we're younger, less experienced in life and relationships, we bypass this because we just really want to belong. And so the surface stuff, like what kind of food do you like? What kind of music do you like? Are we sexually compatible? Like those kinds of things, I think weigh a little heavier for us. As we get into life, get a little more experience, maybe even have a little more ease in the relationship, where it's not such a source of, am I going to belong here or not? Then we really start moving into that second most basic human need, which is I really need to be the best me that I can be. And I really want to have my own identity. So at that point, we're faced with, I think for a lot of people, it's a difficult choice. Am I going to keep the boat sailing smooth and not raise any issues and maybe build resentment? That's the trade-off. Or am I going to risk rocking the boat and challenging my partner and challenging this relationship to grow with me in the way that I want to grow? I think it's scary to put yourself out there where you could potentially be rejected or misunderstood.
Yeah, but I look at my parents who are now in their 80s, but they have very different interests and they have very different goals, but they've somehow managed to stay married for 58 years. And my father, goes and hikes the Appalachian Trail, and my mother goes shopping. The same weekend. That's the compromise. It's like, yeah, you want to go sleep in dirt? Fine, I'm going to go shop. And they're okay with that. That was one where they were able to, you said you can agree on goals or disagree, and it also seems like you can just compromise and say, yeah, fine, and I'll, here's my goal. But I think you do have to have some shared goals. Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, there does have to be some overlap. Otherwise, I think what you move into is either at the best a cold, or at the worst an uneasy cohabitation. Not necessarily in the same house, but in the same life. Kind of like ships passing in the night. I think of a family member of mine. He's on his third or fourth marriage, and they've progressively gotten more this way. He continues to live his own life and pursue his own goals, and his various spouses kind of do the same. But I think that's maybe one of the ingredients in why he's been married so many times. Is eventually the relationship is not a source of satisfaction or meaning. And it's fighting again that when I'm not in a relationship, I can do what I want, but then I'm really lonely and I don't belong anywhere. And I think being a healthy individual and having a healthy relationship requires us to kind of balance the tension between those two needs, and doing that in a way that doesn't cut off any legitimate needs in others, but allows us to kind of hold that tension and support each other in that.
Yeah. Everybody ask us questions, use the Q&A feature. You can ask them about anything at all to do with relationships or goals or whatever. So let's jump into these. Do you have advice for dealing with a spouse with pride and defensiveness? It's difficult to be empathetic and patient while I am the betrayed. He is willing, but his pride is in the way to have conversations.
Yeah, this is really, really difficult, because generally what I see on the other side of kind of the breaking of pride is a recognition for how kind of stubborn or how singularly focused we've been, or maybe how scary it's been to get on the other side of that, being able to say, I don't know, or, I'm not sure what to do. So that's one approach, I think, is to very gently and consistently maybe validate some of the emotions that your partner may not be expressing. Wow, you look really scared to let go of this and to get fully into recovery. I get that, it's a big leap. And kind of letting those statements stand. I think one of the least helpful things to do is to persistently push for the outcome you want, or the outcome your partner's capable of, they're just not ready for. So you kind of have to do a lot of planting seeds out of Prodependence, I think, talks a lot about kind of this approach. How do you support a partner who's not ready to get into recovery? There's also Smart Recovery Friends and Family that does a lot of work around this same question. That pride and defensiveness, I think there's two ways that I see it break. The ideal way is the person has a reckoning and they decide that they're gonna let it go and let things unfold as they're going to unfold. The second, which I see more commonly, is kind of the hitting rock bottom kind of a thing, the recognition that I cannot continue in this way. Life hits you upside the head with it. And as a person who loves someone who is kind of stuck in that control and that pride, it's really, really hard to let those lessons unfold because there's a lot of pain in them. So when you can demonstrate, hey, I see the pain that you're in, or I see you're scared, and I'm not completely afraid of that, or I'm not so afraid of it that I can't speak to it. In my experience, that's kind of the best case scenario for dealing with that, is gently noting what you're seeing, what may be more vulnerable, and then letting your partner do a lot of thinking, giving them space to do a lot of processing around that. You may be able to plant some seeds that come to fruition later on, or help them grow some seeds that they may already be thinking about, but is really scary for them to acknowledge.
Yeah, for the addict or the betraying partner, there can be so many things under the pride and the defensiveness and that behavior, and it may not even be pride or defense. It's probably shame. I mean, it was for me, and it was shame and habit. It was just so hard for me to not try to cover up, and what Jon said about hitting rock bottom. That's what had to happen for me. I mean, people kept saying, hey, you can't save your face and your butt at the same time. And I just kept trying to save my face. And, it didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work. And everybody around me was frustrated because, I still wanted to look good, and I wanted to manipulate how you thought about me. And that meant, lying and keeping secrets and being defensive and argumentative and I had to crash and burn. So not that I want your partner to crash and burn, but
some of the greatest help I got, and I resonate a lot with what you're saying, Scott, about being in that place in recovery, because I was too, and needed a bit of a crash and burn. There were, I think, some wise people around me who were willing to hold a boundary when I was not fit for relational consumption. And that boundary was your abusive or destructive behavior we don't have to be around for. But somehow they were also able to hold a line where I could still feel that there was love and there was affection and acceptance. It wasn't about punishing me for my behavior. It was about creating some health around themselves. And those were the relationships when the bottom fell out, and I, felt like I had nothing left. Those were the relationships that I was able to turn to and at least get some bearing and some connection with. But it's, if I could invent another way in recovery to get the pride and the defensiveness to break that wasn't so painful, I wish it were possible, but it's often pain is one of the best teachers of that.
Yeah, and my experience is actually very similar. There were people who basically said, we love you. We don't love your behavior, but we love you, and we'll be here for you when you're ready to, deal with this in a healthy way. And then
Yeah.
those are the people who are still here for me, which is kind of a nice thing. Okay, do you have tips? Ask us questions, Q&A feature or chat feature, preferably Q&A, about anything to do with relationships. Do you have tips for a partner who works 6 days at a very stressful job, owner of business, so there's no option to work less right now, 12 hours a day is normal. How do you relax, get out of the head more, and be more in touch with the body and some recovery work? I don't want to push anyone who is stressed out to do the inner work when he is tired and has no time or energy. Interesting question.
Yeah, I'll speak from my personal experience here. The only thing that made sense to me, because I'm the owner of a business too, and I know what it's like to feel like it's got to be 12-hour days every day of the week, or you're not going to make it. I had to start looking at the financial value of downtime, and accepting that as a cost of doing business. Um, when I started working for myself, I would often look at people who had things like paid vacation, and sick time, and think, wow, they're really, really lucky. And then I realized I had that if I put it in the plan. Recognizing that there's actually a monetary value, there's a productivity value in me taking a week off. It's going to give me, I don't know how many more months of being able to do some hard pushing and helping a lot of people, that will translate into an economic value down the road. But right now it costs something because that's not money coming in. Or when I worked in a group practice setting, when I wasn't there doing my job, yeah, some of the nuts and bolts got a little bit looser. But I had to accept that as the cost of doing that part of the business. For business owners, I think it's a big mindset shift when you realize that you are the asset, not what you make or who you make it for. You are the asset. So just like you would invest in office space or equipment to make or do whatever you do you invest in yourself? And it's really, again, one of those mindset shifts. And again, here I was lucky because I had not only a partner, but I had other peers and other mentors who very gently put that out there. I can remember a handful of like come to Jesus conversations around that where I felt hit over the head, but there was a lot of real gentle momentum. Like from my partner, I would hear, we're going to be fine. And I have confidence in that. You taking time off isn't going to ruin things. Or from other therapists, mentors, and peers who would say, yeah, I remember what it felt like to be so wound up there. I know you'll figure it out, and I can't wait until you can get to a place where you feel relaxed like I do around this and you're able to have a better rhythm. Again, it's kind of that gently holding a direction or an aspiration and leaving a lot of room for that person to figure it out. Something that I think affected me greatly and was helpful. My spouse is one of the most health conscious people that I know. It's not that they're perfect at it, but they're very consistent. And they maintained that consistency and always been inviting to me. And we've been together 13 years, and I'd say it's probably taken 10 years of me resenting her consistency and feeling like that was judgment, and then realizing over the last few years, oh, that's an invitation, and actually like I can participate in this, and it does feel good, and it does give me something. But that steady, gentle, consistent invitation made a big difference for me. Kind of that leading by example. For someone who's really in their head and wound up, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do the inner work. But as I saw people doing it and I saw them balance, I got a little more confident for me to try it.
Yeah, I have a neuropsychologist friend who is also a Stephen Covey facilitator, and Stephen Covey's a sort of, use your time wisely, basically. And my friend came over one day. This was when I was freelancing full time, and I had literally not had a day off in months. And I was working 10 and 12 hours. I was making a ton of money. It was great. It was, but he walked in the door, didn't even knock, or maybe he knocked and I didn't hear it, but he came into the house and he looked at me, and he just looked at me and said, "When is the last time you had a day off?" And I started leafing back through my day planner, and he just said, "Stop." And he shut my computer, and he said, "We're going to Anaheim. We're going to a baseball game." And that was it. And I was so grateful that that somebody stepped in and said, "Enough. You're killing yourself." And this same friend who tells the story, I think it's in the Franklin Covey literature, about two woodcutters. And one of them is out there just sawing and sawing and sawing and sawing and sawing and sawing. The other one, takes breaks, and he sharpens the saw, and he takes a break, and he works a little while, and he has lunch, and he sharpens the saw. And it's the guy who takes time to sharpen the saw who gets more wood cut. Because to show it, we have to step away from what we're doing and sharpen the saw. So, I would encourage you to encourage your partner to do that. And then I had another point. Well, anyway, when somebody is in that, my other point was, if he's serious about his recovery, even during my 12 hours a day, 7 days a week stage, I would take time to go to a meeting. That was non-negotiable for me. I had my non-negotiables that were, the little tiny circle of goals that Jon had a little while ago. Those are my non-negotiables. These are the things that are going to happen in my life one way or another. And I had to put that in, because even then I knew if I don't take time to at least go to a meeting, I'm going to go insane, I'm going to relapse, and my entire world is going to fall apart. So, yeah. But how do you, how can this individual, ask us questions, because we don't have any in our queue right now. So ask us some questions, please. But how can this individual get her partner to take some downtime and maybe relax? I mean, and also do the inner work, because I do think it's important to do the inner work even when you're stressed out. It may be more important, isn't it?
Yeah. I think sitting down and having a left brain to left brain conversation about that. Here's the logic behind why you should do this. Why don't you get on board? Like, stress and running a business this way is actually a right-brained experience. It's emotional. When you pull back and look at the big picture, like the woodcutter story you were telling, Scott, it actually doesn't make sense to work like this, especially not long-term. Maybe there's some short-term periods. So I think setting up some of those body-based, right-brained experiences can be helpful. Like I remember in the beginning of my career when money was really tight, and I would literally come home with knots here, and you could see it in my posture, you could see in my body was carrying it. I remember one Saturday morning when our kids were small, we woke up and I was going to get out of bed and do the normal thing, and my wife said, "You better get ready for your massage. It starts in 30 minutes." And it was a non-negotiable thing. It wasn't like, "Would you like this? I'll set it up." She had saved and set aside and said, "This is going to happen for you." And I went totally annoyed. I was like, it's Saturday morning. Like, I need to get on top of yard work. I need to blah, 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 blah. And it was a really good masseuse that she had picked. And I think she even splurged and got me like the 90-minute massage. And I came home. I wasn't quite ready to admit that I needed that. Or to say, yeah, that was perfect. But I came home with kind of this, like, that felt really good. That was an opportunity to breathe. And for me, And I think for a lot of people who are prone to distance themselves from the body-based stuff and work this way, it's a long road. But setting up some of those experiences, insisting that they happen, telling your partner, you know, this is what we're doing, when you get home from work, or, you know, this weekend, or even, you know, showing up in the middle of the workday and bringing lunch, if even if he can't pause and eat it with you, just saying, I'm going to make sure that you have some food today, take some time to really eat it. Those kind of right brain, body based experiences for me is what started to really sink this in and give me way more confidence, in being able to take time and rest. Right now, where my work life balance sits is I'm probably about 50-50, which isn't necessarily the ideal number for everybody, but it works really well for me. And I have a lot more confidence in the work getting done part of things because my saw is so much sharper.
And just real quick, the connection between the body and the mind, the body, you know, Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. I mean, he basically talks about the body tells us when we're not doing well. And, you know, when you come home with huge knots in your shoulder, you know, that's more than just huge knots in your shoulder. That's stress and anxiety and all kinds of things. And yeah, so the question mentions getting more in touch with his body. And I think that's a really great observation. You know, I had to learn early in my recovery that my body does talk to me. You know, if I'm feeling anxious, I feel it here. If I'm feeling angry, I feel it, you know, if my face is red, I'm feeling a certain, you know, I had to learn, and your partner may have to learn those things.
Yeah.
Next question. Yeah. You have more, John? You want to go to the
Nope.
next one?
Nope. No,
Okay.
no.
All right. What do you suggest for a couple who cannot agree with the amount of recovery needed in a day to be successful? My husband will only really commit to doing a couple meetings a week and keeps relapsing and never getting closer in our marriage. Yet he never thinks that he might need a little more than just a couple meetings a week to be successful. It's like the definition of insanity. By the way, the addict's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. So,
Yeah. If I could here, I would just note, I think some of the solution might lie in how the problem is set up. For spouses, I think a lot of the time it's not necessarily a recovery process that they are, you know, that they get their peace and security from. It's the sobriety and it's the changes that you get your peace and security from. So I'd reframe the whole conversation, and instead of, can we agree on the amount of recovery, it's, you hold a line with what you need. If it's, I need you to be sober. I can't continue in this relationship the way that I have if you continue to betray me through acting out. So that's the focus. Whatever you need to do to get sober, I need you to do it. And really kind of putting the ball back in his court to define how that's going to happen if he wants that to happen. That's one of the things that can be hard about kind of changing that conversation, because when you guys can debate, or you can talk about, should you be doing 3 or 4 meetings a week, it kind of gives you a voice, in that. But when you say, I need you to be sober, do what you need to do to figure that out, it really becomes this journey, and what he's going to do to figure out to be sober, if that's motivating enough for him. But that's where I'd reframe some of that. And again, I think kind of gently pointing out, hey, you've been doing what you've been doing for a while. And oftentimes I'll see between addicts and partners, the addict may genuinely be experiencing some relief, and they may genuinely feel better, even if they're still not sober or completely sober. Just the fact that he's getting out a couple times a week and connecting with other people who are struggling, maybe when you're in great pain, a little bit of pain relief can feel like a lot. To the person who's not in the pain, but watching you like do this insanity thing over and over again, it makes a lot of sense to me when I hear spouses say, yeah, he says it's a big change, but it's really not. That's true too. And so I think being able to hold your boundary for what you need in a partner, to hold that consistently and gently, not have it focus on the amount of meetings, but just, hey, you're not getting any more sober. And that's kind of one of the minimum things that I need to see happen for you. What are you willing to do to address that sobriety piece? And that's where you start the negotiation. What are you willing to do versus what do you have to do? For most addicts that I work with, even as the therapist that they're paying to help them get sober, I find that if I get too prescriptive too early on, this is what you have to do, XYZ, or it's not going to work. It sets up a power struggle rather than asking. So this is coming to mind from Smart Recovery. They talk about the 3 questions. What do you want in your future? What are you doing today? And what do you feel about what you're doing? That's essentially the flavor of this here. Is this the best that you had thought for yourself? And if it's not, what do you feel about what you're doing about that?
Yeah, I think we can actually take this back to today's topic of goals. I mean, that's kind of what you just said. What do you want from your recovery? Here's what I want from your recovery. What do you want from your recovery? And then he can figure out what he might do to meet not only your goals, but his own goals. And then I would also echo what Jon said about, as an addict, a tiny little change felt huge to me, whereas other people may not have even noticed it, but it felt big to me. So I felt like I was progressing, even though I was still acting out for quite a while. It's an early recovery, especially early sex addiction recovery, is really weird. It's not like alcoholism where you're drinking or you're not drinking. I mean, in a way it is, but in a way it isn't. So, Jon, are you still there? Your picture's frozen. Yeah, I think we lost Jon.
I can hear you.
There you go. You're there. Okay. Yeah, you're going in and out on us. Did you want to add anything to that, Jon, or should I go to the next question?
No, we can go to the next question.
Okay. All right. Okay, we are struggling with old communication patterns that feel very ingrained, where the addict expresses himself however he wants, draws attention disproportionately to his needs. I feel like I've become wired to be focused on his needs and moods. The way I communicate with him is more passive. Feels like we are stuck in this pattern. It was interrupted briefly when he first disclosed. I felt like a different person that would be different from now on, and said what was on my mind, but it didn't last. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just talking to a client this morning about this phenomenon, how you can have big events that kind of alter how you feel and how you interact, and they can feel life-changing, like that promise. I felt like I was going to be a different person from now on, but it didn't last. I think that's more the norm than the exception to the rule. The benefit that you have on this side of it, though, is now you know what both sides feel like. And again, not just that left brain. Theoretically, I can speak up and speak my mind, but you were doing that, you were living it, you could feel it. So that would be the first place that I would look here, is what changed for me. I had this breakthrough, I felt freer, I felt more present. What happened with me? And asking the same question as you observe your spouse, what happened with my spouse? And that might be a place to start, especially, or I would say, if you're in couples therapy, in your next couple session, you might say, can we talk about right after disclosure? I felt like there were some really different things in our relationship that aren't there anymore. And I wonder why. I think disclosure can be a big kind of earth-shifting thing. It also puts most couples into a dynamic in the relationship they've never been in before that's really scary to them. More of a dynamic of equality, more of a dynamic of empathy. And that's like rolling over on your back and exposing your belly to a predator, especially for a lot of folks who struggle with sex addiction. In sex addiction, there's a lot of exertion of control over relationships and dynamics, and that's where that person's sense of safety comes from, is being able to control. So, shining the light on that, or saying, hey, it's feeling this way again. What do you think about it? Are you noticing this? That would be a place to start. Seeing if there's an opportunity to get to some more of those vulnerable feelings, or even just some starting to wonder, what do you think happened? Because this relationship arrangement after disclosure, that was working well for me. I would start in that direction.
Yeah. And this goes back to old patterns are hard to break. You know, recovery for the addict, healing for the betrayed partner and the couple, it's always going to be 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 steps back. I mean, this is really normal. And you make this big leap and you're like, yeah, we've got it. And then 3 days later, you're like, wait, didn't we just have it? We were good 3 days ago. What happened? And that's just normal, because these patterns, and you said in your question, that these patterns feel very ingrained. Well, that's because they are, probably.
Yeah.
And particularly relationship patterns. Is it Sue Johnson who calls it the relationship dance, or somebody talks about the dance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of money patterns that I see couples get into. There can be this invigorated focus and some goals. We want to put cash in the bank, or we want to pay off debt. And for a lot of couples, having the conversation the first time is scary enough, so they don't really do the maintenance conversations and the following up and the calibrating. So before you know it, while our stated goal is that we're going to pay off debt, we're actually racking up more. So part of this, it kind of goes back to those goals, and that might be something to look at too. Did we stay calibrated? From what you're saying, clearly not. But that's also part of the process. Can we calibrate again? Can we go back to something that's a little more workable for both of us? That's how change happens. It's not an immediate switch out. It's more of that kind of slow roll. And there's really balancing that has to happen along the way.
Yeah, I kind of have a question related to this that's more specific to the question that was asked after disclosure. Felt like equals, the discussion was open. And now it's reverting to the old pattern. Could a conversation about goals, I want to be an equal partner, I want to be able to speak my mind, what are your goals in that regard? Because that's where we were and I was liking it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what you said there, but I'm really specifically talking about our communication goals, and the power dynamic, basically.
Yeah, I would say the vast majority of, I'll say, because it's been pretty split. The vast majority of people, men and women that I've worked with who do this in relationships, the more dominating conversation pattern, it's not conscious for them. It's not like they have a stated goal of, I'm going to dominate every conversation. And when it's pointed out with kind of that gentle curiosity, I'd say over 80% of the time, the person says, well, yeah, I don't want you to feel that way. And I don't want our relationship dynamic to be this way. And then the very next sentence, they may be going into that pattern again, but just that awareness starts to shift things. Hey, this is feeling like another one of those instances where I'm going to tend to get more passive and you tend to get more directive. Do we want to pause? Do we want to redirect? Simply calling attention to it and having some ways that in a mutually supportive way, we can talk about what's going on. That helps to change these dynamics too.
Yeah, and again, it's going to be just a little tiny bit at a time. I continually work on my character defects, and I remind myself every morning as part of my 11th step, my conscious contact with my higher power, that this is the one I'm working on today. And I'll work on it for an entire month. And at the end of the month, it's a little bit better than it was at the beginning of the month, usually, because I have to keep reminding myself and working on it. It takes a long time to change, what's hardwired in my brain. And relationships are, relationship with self, relationship with someone else. It's hardwired, a lot of it.
Yeah.
Would you agree that in recovery work, the first goal would be getting back to the self and feeling good, better about self and in your inner world? So self-love, then spread it out to your relationships. Interesting question.
Yes, with an asterisk. I wish it were that simple. Usually, so I'm thinking about it this way. If heaven forbid you were in an accident and you sustained impact damage to your body and you had bleeding, there is a source of that bleeding that has to be addressed. However, if we don't staunch the bleeding, you may bleed out and not be able to make it to the point where we can get to the core issue. So in recovery, I do think that inner world work is probably where the most bang for your buck is, and that's where long-term recovery and sobriety comes out of. However, there's some things that we do in recovery that cause us metaphorically to bleed out, and those need to be addressed. If you can't live another day to sustain the internal work, focusing on the internal work may not be, while it is an important priority, it may not be the biggest priority. Like, I remember a conversation a couple years ago with Dr. Rob, and he said something like, if you can't quit paying people for sex and doing lots of cocaine, maybe your number one concern isn't, the longevity of your relationship. It might be figuring out how to stop paying people for sex and using cocaine. Um, there are some behaviors in addiction, and I would say even on a partner side of things, that can have an element of danger and an element of risk to health immediately that need to be addressed first. And sometimes that addressing it looks like, white knuckling. I'm holding on. I'm not using cocaine because I've decided not to, and the only thing that's keeping me out of it is because I'm in contact with my sponsor 12 times a day. If that's what it takes initially to get to a point where you have breathing room, that then you can look to, why do I feel like I need to use cocaine so much? Then that's addressing a symptom that gets us in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of Dr. Rob's other points that he makes, I think he makes it in Out of the Doghouse and Prodependence both, is that the betrayed partner or the loved one of the addict is often the last one brought back into the intimacy equation. Because addiction, by its very nature, is kind of an intimacy disorder. As an addict, I am afraid of becoming vulnerable with other people to get my needs met, so I turn to a substance or behavior because it's safer, it's more reliable. It doesn't last very long, but it'll distract me from my unmet emotional needs long enough to make it through the day or the next hour or whatever. So instead of turning to you, I turn to a substance or behavior. And usually it's because I learned early on through, childhood trauma and neglect and abuse and whatever, which is a huge gamut there. That's a whole other webinar all by itself. But that other people can't be trusted, and the closer they are to me, the more likely they are to hurt me. So as I build back up toward intimacy, I'm going to start with my therapist, who I'm paying, thank you very much. So he has to be nice to me. And then I'm going to do a sponsor who's in recovery with me and has the same problem. So he's going to be nice to me. And then maybe I'll make a friend or two in recovery. And then I'll go back to my spouse and start to open up and be vulnerable with the person who matters most to me, but also the person who can hurt me the most by virtue of mattering the most. So often the spouse and the partner, is the last one into the equation, which stinks for the spouse or the partner, but at the same time, that's the only way the addict can get there, and it kind of is, whether we call that self-love or working on your inner world or whatever, it's getting to the point where I'm comfortable enough and have the ego strength to risk it all with the person that I really love and care about.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring up the ego strength piece, because that is a huge part of doing the inner work. It reminds me of a couple that I worked with, and in my initial assessment of their relationship, it became very apparent that this relationship was abusive, not characterologically. So it was some behaviors that were safety seeking for one partner that were actually very abusive. And so in my feedback session, I outlined to them, here is some of the abuse that's going on in this relationship, and that changes this week or we can't do any work together. the goal for this couple and what we got to work on after that was really that bonding and that inner world and reflecting. But we had to address some of that other stuff first, or there was no way to get them the ego strength to do that. So I outlined, like, bank account information will be shared immediately. Access to money will now be mutual. You're not going to drive your partner to every appointment they have. Like, just some things that help to give each partner some capital, some confidence to then start taking those risks with each other. And whether it's in a relationship or individually, I think sometimes those immediate interventions help us get to that point where we can then do some more of that internal work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every addict enters recovery at a different phase, and every betrayed partner, shows up in it. So it's always going to be different. But yeah, safety, and the ego strength to do the work needs to be there before the work can be done.
Yeah.
And everybody needs to feel safe, and probably neither of those partners you were just talking about realized that the things they were doing were really so controlling and abusive and causing problems. And so he said, this is not normal. It's causing your partner to feel unsafe.
Yeah.
So, we're out of time, and we've actually gotten all of our questions today. So thank you, everybody. Wonderful group. Jon, do you want to say anything to take us out?
No, just thanks for coming, and I'll look forward to coming back in a couple of weeks. We're going to keep talking about shared meaning and purpose. So I'll see you guys then.
Cool. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Stay safe, everybody. And Jon, stay safe and enjoy your vacation. I'll enjoy mine.
You too, Scott. Bye.
Bye, everybody.